are surprised that Panama is not a tax haven. From property taxes to income taxes, there is plenty to choose from. We are here joined by CPA Derick, who wrote this little but wonderful manual and some other books, if you go to the link that we're placing down below, about real estate investments, everything about taxes, what you need to be on the lookout, what you need to map in order to have a great purchase and a great investment. In this episode, we are going to be touching sales taxes in Panama. So this is for all of you owners of properties in Panama. When you're going to sell the property, what do you need to know? What are the taxes that are involved? How do they get paid? When do they get paid? And so that you can calculate properly your price and what you expect to have at the end of the rainbow. So here we go. First burning question in the internet. Like literally I Googled it. What are property sales taxes in Panama? Just list them.
So in Panama, when you sell a property, there are two taxes. One is the real estate transfer tax and capital gains tax. So the real estate transfer tax is just a tax for transferring the property from one owner to another owner, and that is 2% on the sales price or on the updated cadastral value. Cadastral value can also be your acquisition cost. And capital gains tax. So capital gains tax is, so in Panama, usually if you Google or if you ask anybody what taxes you have to pay when you sell a property, they will tell you it's 5%. So it's a 2% tax and a 3% tax.
Calculated on the sales price itself.
That's correct. That's correct. That is not as black and white. And then so the reason why I actually wrote this book also is on the topic of capital gains tax. So yeah, so it will be 2% real estate transfer tax and 3% or 10% capital gains tax, depending on.
So in that capital gains, then it's not such a black and white. It's going to depend on your records and how you do it. If you own the property, let's say, does it differ between selling me as a, let's say, Patrizia Pinzon, personal, sells the property versus Patrizia SA, selling the property? So what's the difference between natural person and a corporation selling that property? Is it the same calculation, 2 and 3?
Yes, yeah. For whether a private person or a corporation selling a property, it is the same calculation. The only difference is a tax that is paid, which I detail in the book as well, a tax that is paid after the sale once you do your annual tax return, if the company that sells the property is an operating company.
Exactly. So if it is a company that was only created in order to hold this one asset and this one asset gets sold, then basically you pay the 3% and the 2%.
That's correct.
And there's just one declaration at the end of the year, probably that corporation goes
That's
away.
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
So what happens, there used to be a difference between a natural person selling and a corporation selling. So right now what you're saying is pretty much equalized. It's the same tax.
Yeah, it's
no
the
matter
same.
what.
It's the same tax. What the difference also depends on what we call ordinary course of business. So in Panama, if you sell less than 10 properties in a year, in the current year and the previous tax year, then the purchasing and selling of a property is not in your ordinary course of business. If you sell more than 10 properties per year, then that will be in your ordinary course of business, and that's a different tax regulation for those. So this book is intended mostly for not for the companies that are selling tens of properties per year. It's more for the individual investor that is investing in properties through a corporation, whether 2, 3, 4, or 5 properties.
I mean, and we do have investors that they are purchasing packages. So let's say if you come to Panama and you have like 5 apartments, or do think about the number of apartments you have and your portfolio, how you're going to manage it, and that will make a difference then.
Yes,
on
you can have more than 10 apartments. I have clients with more than 10 apartments. However, they're not selling those 10 apartments within the same year. So it's the selling of more than 10 apartments that
in the same year.
Yes, in the same year or in the previous tax year. That is what puts you in a different tax bracket.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and in a transaction, when does an owner need to pay the 2% and the 3%?
Right. So that is paid before the property is transferred. You cannot transfer the property until those taxes are paid. And then to harken back on the capital gains tax, which I touched a little bit on, and that's the initial topic of the blog that I wrote that turned into a book, is that in 2021 there was a change in capital gains tax regulation. And that is basically, so in Panama prior to 2021, if you sold a property, whether you made $100,000 in profit or you made zero profit, whether you sold it at a loss or at a marginal profit, you had to pay an advance 3% capital gains tax. Now, capital gains tax is an advance. It's not the definitive capital gains tax. So let's say, for example, if you sold a property at cost, you didn't make any real profit, you will still have to pay that 3% of capital gains tax, and then once the transaction is closed, you can then request for the government to refund that advanced capital gains tax. However, the tricky part is the government in Panama does not like giving back money, so that process can take years.
That would not be unique to the government of Panama.
So that
I have the sense.
So that process can take years.
Yeah.
Now, in 2021, they changed that and made it a lot easier for investors, where when you prepare the capital gains tax form, if you do not sell more than 10 properties per year, if it's not in your ordinary course of business, then you can choose the lower tax. So if the 3%, so the 3% advanced capital gains tax is on the sales price or on the acquisition cost, whichever is the highest.
Uh-huh.
Now, if the 3% advanced capital gains tax is lower than the 10% capital gains tax on the profit, then you can choose the lower amount directly on the tax form. You do not have to pay the advance and then request a refund. So if you sold a property, for example, with a small profit, you can choose to pay the 10% on that small profit instead of the 3% on the entire sales price. So that was the change that happened a few years ago.
And that's really, really important to know. The other thing is, if you guys haven't seen the video about purchasing a property, closing on a property, go take a look at it now, because what he said is that the owner has to pay this in advance. What does that mean? The buyer gave you a deposit. Usually that deposit is between 10%, 15%, whatever gets negotiated, but usually it's around those numbers. With that money, the owner has to cover all these expenses that are done in advance. So when is the owner going to be doing that? Usually when they sign the deed, and at that moment, the owner is not getting paid by the buyer the rest of the cash. What the person is getting is a letter of payment from a bank. So it's basically paper. And based on that paper, that instrument of trust, then the owner goes and actually disemburses cash to pay all these taxes. So it's a little bit of a trust, but that's why the letter of payment from a bank, which is essentially an escrow in the buyer's bank account in Panama, it's so important, because all of this gets paid just beforehand. There are other expenses that an owner has to pay. So what are other expenses that the owner needs to be mindful of in order to be able to transfer?
Right. So other than the 2% transfer tax and the 3% or 10% capital gains tax, you also have to make sure you pay your property taxes, because the property cannot be transferred unless the property taxes are paid. And then other payment, which are not necessarily taxes, would be your water bill has to be paid, your garbage bill has to be paid, HOA fees have to be paid. So your property has to be in complete good standing with many government entities to be able to transfer.
And the corporation has to be in good standing.
Yes.
In case this is a corporation. So
Yes.
you do have that added.
Yeah, so I'll also break that down in the book, because a lot of investors, they just incorporate a company just to hold the property, and when they sell it, they decide to sell the actual shares of the corporation instead of the property itself. So yeah, if you're selling the shares of the company that holds the property, your corporation has to be in good standing as well.
Exactly. So once the property is transferred and everybody cashes, the keys are given, what would be your recommendation, for example, for the new owner?
Okay, so for the new owner, so once the deal is closed, the property is in your name, the first thing that you need to do is update the information in the National Land Administration Authority. That's called, in Spanish, called ANATI. So that's because there's usually not an automatic connection between when you register the sale in the public registry and on the National Land Administration Authority. So why is this important? That's important because the information that gets updated is the acquisition cost, which is what you pay for the property, and the new owner's information. Now, if you don't do this update, which I've seen lots of cases, the tax authority is going to continue to calculate your property taxes based on the previous value of the property. And then let's say you decide to do the update 2 or 3 years later, you're gonna have to pay back taxes with surcharges and interest. So that's why it's important that as soon as the sale is closed, make sure you update the information in the National Land Administration Authority so everything is up to date. And then the second step will be to get your tax account in the DGI. So once you do that, then you have to now link your email address to your property's tax account.
So you get everything.
So you get everything, you get all your emails, and you can log in, see your property taxes. If you're in Casco and you're not paying property taxes, you can see your exoneration and when it expires on that same account. And you can see all the payment history. You can pay online through that same platform. So that will be the second thing. Make sure you update in ANATI, and then that you get your property tax account.
And also, if you haven't seen our previous episode, if you're declaring this as your main residence and this is up to 120,000, you need to make sure that that benefit of no property taxes that you would have for these two things together gets registered. So that is something that is on you, it's not on the seller, because you are the one that are declaring that as a main residence under this 120,000 benefit.
Yes.
So make sure you do that. This is not financial advice.
Another thing to piggyback on that is, so if you register a property as your main home or as your taxable family estate, prior to October 5th, if I'm not mistaken, the approval process was the government used to take 3 months to whether accept it or not. They changed it in the new law, whereas the approval or rejection is automatically.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then also, because this also happens mostly with foreign investors, is that there are countries where the tax authority will send you a tax bill to your mail or to your email, and then will let you know how much you need to pay. In Panama, it's up to you. So you have to, that's why I said you have to get your tax account up to register, so then you can log in and make sure you pay your taxes on time and everything is done on time.
That's amazing. And that's a great closing for this video, because in our next one, we're going to be talking about accounting and tax obligations. So let's try and put a little bit of order to everything we've said. And again, if you like this material, the book goes so much deeper. You need to get it, and it will give you everything you need to know in order to have a great conversation with your lawyer, your accountant, and even your broker, depending on what you're doing in Panama. And if you like this video, subscribe.